Bang! So hey, this is Andrew Stansky, and today we're going to talk about the Leica M11-D, the screenless camera from Leica. So I'd like to thank Camtech for supplying this crazy cool camera I've had in my possession over the last few days, and I've gotten used to it enough to at least share my thoughts and opinions with you guys on this camera. Thoughts and opinions I do have, because I've never really gotten the chance to play with one of these screenless Leicas for more than a few minutes, and having it in my possession and taking it around with me has been a real treat, especially coming from someone who shoots a lot of film. So I think the most similar experience for this camera would be like shooting an M6, like a metered M body, right? I definitely see the appeal. I love the ergonomics of this camera. First and foremost, I really like the way it holds in your hand, and not having the bump for the screen has been such a nice, refreshing texture to the hand. Because as soon as I picked up my M10R, I put my finger, my hand on the camera, my thumb immediately felt the screen coming out, and I was like, okay, I wish it was flush. I have a gut feeling also that the M12 that's going to come after this camera, this generation of M11s, should hopefully at least aesthetically have a flush screen with the body, because the M11s and the M10s have a screen that comes out a little tiny bit. And now after playing with this screenless Leica, it's such a nice feeling to just have your hand rest on the cylindrical body and the flat back of the body and not have to have something pushing against you. It just feels so much more slick, and I just love the way it feels. The camera aesthetically is gorgeous. It's super subdued, even down to the window, the rangefinder, viewfinder here. They smoked the reflective glass that they have on the top and the bottom bars here. On the M10s and the other M11s, they're more reflective. They're like chrome, whereas this is like a gunmetal kind of look to it, I guess you can call it. And the rest of the camera is pretty damn simple. You've got customizable buttons. You got two, and I'm very happy that finally, as someone who has an SL, they implemented a push wheel, like the scroll wheel in the back. You can now push in on it and customize that button as well. The whole experience is exactly like the M11, so I'm not going to kind of dive too much into the specifics of what, you know, the camera's like to that degree. If you are curious about it, definitely check out my first impressions of the Leica M11 back in 2022. A lot of what I said there carries over into this camera, because it is, of course, the same exact camera with just without a screen. There are a few differences though. The one I handled back then was the brass one, and this is the aluminum one. All black Leica M11s are aluminum. So that being said, there is 100 grams of weight savings, and I noticed it immediately when I picked up this camera. I put my steel rim reissue on it, and the camera felt front heavy, and that's a very light lens. And even with this 35 Summicron, it felt more front heavy as well, which was a surprise, coupled with the fact that, you know, the camera is noticeably a little bit thinner because of the lack of the screen. All in all, the experience feels like a lighter Leica M camera, because it's exactly what it is. It definitely feels more comfortable in the hand, and I don't mind the weight savings, but I kind of do miss the weight of the brass, and especially the cold, nice texture. It's just the experience of a brass Leica. It just feels like it's meant to be. Aluminum, I've said it in the past and I'll say it again, just doesn't really, in my opinion, belong on Leicas, and I feel like it is Leica's shrinkflation because the knobs, the dials here are brass, and if I look at them closely, I can actually see a difference in texture and color of the brass dials versus the aluminum anodized finish or painted finish. I don't know what they call this anymore, but it's an interesting texture, the black one. It's like a chalkboard almost. It's very matte, very non-reflective, very discreet. Even the leatherettes on this camera is different. It's less textured than my M10Rs. It's very much like the monochromes, which is nice. It's slick. The whole body looks gorgeous. I feel like it looks like the Leica M60 edition, the very first screenless Leica. It's like that audio design. Everything's slick on this thing. It's gorgeous. It's streamlined. It really looks nice. The only thing is this guy has strap lugs, so you can put a strap on it. Good. I would not want to have this camera without any kind of tethering because it's a very expensive drop if you were to drop this thing. But that's the other thing, is because this camera lacks a screen, I guess I'll talk about the experience now. There is a different element at play psychologically when you use this camera. The M11-D does really feel like a nice in-between from a digital camera to a film camera. The M experience in general has always been very analog, right? And this just builds upon that. Whether or not you need a screen or not is really up to you to decide. And I think this video, I'd like to address if that really is a prerequisite to choosing this camera or not. I think that at the end of the day, I can go either way. For me, the takeaway with this camera was it doesn't differ that much for me at the end of the day, whether or not I have a screen or not. I think it's liberating not having a screen, to be honest with you, because I don't have the inclination to look at my picture and see. It puts more pressure on me getting the shot right on the first try. As far as, you know, setting this thing up, I like to underexpose my images. That being said, because this is an M11, as soon as you turn the camera on, boom, there's the delay. It meters off the sensor, right? So when the camera meters off the sensor, that in turn gives you better metering, right? And this camera seems to preserve the highlights, has a bias towards preserving the highlights, even when I did set it up to not have a negative exposure compensation. But I still set up a negative 0.7 exposure comp just to make sure that I never do wind up overexposing this camera, because I don't want to lose my shots, right? And it works. The M11 files are really just incredible. The dynamic range on this 60 megapixel sensor is phenomenal. I even, now that I have the M10R finally, I managed to compare the two. So this is, like, I guess, a nice to know for you at home, but the M11 does seem to have slightly more tonality to the images. I did notice that there is a magenta cast, but I think the magenta cast is just the white balance that it generates. And so that being said, I would select the white balance cut by using a color picker in Lightroom and select a neutral surface. And I got the M10R and the M11 to have the exact same white balance. So they looked exactly the same. And honestly, in a blind test, I would not be able to differentiate one from the next. So that's really good to know. Next is the base ISO of this sensor is 64, which is crazy. The detail that this thing resolves is really outstanding. It is like shooting a medium format camera in a 35mm sensor and size. This is definitely a tiny, tiny camera. And that also comes with some of the quirks that the M11 had when I first tried it, and they carry over into this one. And now that I've had enough time to kind of revisit this camera, I've noticed coming from the M10R that this 60 megapixel sensor it resolves a little bit more obviously, but it introduces something because the camera is metering off the sensor. I've finally been able to pinpoint where the shutter shake comes from, because I've noticed that with my M10R, at 1/60th of a second, it's risque to shoot at that shutter speed, but I still managed to pull out, stable shots nonetheless. Whereas with the M11s, I never managed to get a perfectly stable shot at 1/60th of a second. It's doable, but it's hard to do. And I think coupled with the lighter aluminum body and the fact that the shutter has to close and then open again, it just incurs more vibrations in the camera that wind up shaking the sensor and the camera, and you will get this kind of shutter shock. The original A7R from Sony had that issue, and then they went with IBIS, and then that was gone. And I feel like the answer to this, for this, should have been that you can turn off the metering, which would be really great. And of course, if you could just, somehow have a more dampened shutter, because even coming from the shutter sound, this M11 does feel like it's louder than the M10Rs, but I feel like it's just the pitch of the shutter is a little bit more high pitched. So I don't know if it translates to it being more audible from a distance, but it definitely feels louder and of course more delayed than the M10Rs, because the M10R, the shutter's already closed, metering off the shutter blades, and then this guy meters off the sensor. So You do get better metering with this camera, but you also get the unfortunate downsides of metering off the camera, which is the fact that it has to close and open. So typical M11 issue, if you ask me. Whether or not that's a deal breaker is up to you to decide. I still think this is a phenomenal camera. The biggest benefit for an aluminum body is when I'm out in the cold like this, my brass bodies get so damn cold to the touch, where this aluminum has better heat dissipation, and it definitely is much more easy to hold. So at least there's, you know, there's that for the going for the aluminum. But yeah, I do like the styling a lot. I think it's slick. I really enjoyed it. I like this dial in the back for the ISO. I got really used to it quickly. I also managed to take it in really low light conditions, and I mentioned it when I picked it up that I felt like the viewfinder was brighter on this. I did a comparison. I put my iPhone up to the viewfinder of this M11-D and my M10R. Maybe it's like a smidge brighter, but it's hard to tell. I would say it's like, if it's brighter, it's like maybe 5% brighter than the M10 viewfinder. So it's cool. I also noticed that the viewfinder patch on this and the M11s have rounded corners, whereas on the M10s, it's rectangular. It's not like anybody asked for that, but it's cool to see that they managed to do that. But you do lose a bit more surface. This aluminum finish, like I said, it has like a kind of a chalkboard texture to it. I feel like I could just go with chalk right on it or something like that, put my notes on it. It also feels more brittle as a result. It's got like an eggshell texture to it. So the brass, feeling the brass through the paint or the black chrome has always been part of like the Leica feel, like haptically for me. And the aluminum definitely feels different. The finish is not like as thin, I would say, or textured like the SLs are. This is definitely more rough to the touch. I feel like I could file my nails down with it. It's matte, which I think adds to that sleek look that this camera has. All in all, it's like a stealth bomber. Next to my M10R black paint, this is way more discreet. My M10R just looks like a flashy, you know, black paint, piano black camera, and this looks like something that actually is more like a tool. I like it a lot for that. I also noticed another thing is whenever you take a picture of this camera, there's an LED that lights up on the bottom, and that actually got in the way in low light conditions. I was in like a listening bar. The lighting was super dim, and I was taking pictures vertically, and I noticed that I saw my hand light up red every time I took a picture, and people were actually looking at it because this little LED is very directional and very bright, and I wish there was a way to turn that off. I don't know if there is, or maybe there is, but I feel like that didn't need to be there. I feel like the confirmation for taking an image should have been like a more subtle light, maybe in the viewfinder or somewhere else facing you, the photographer, rather than away from you, because also I'm not looking underneath my camera every time I take a picture to realize if I took the shot or not. The experience has been really interesting. I walked around here on the ice with it, and I really got to appreciate the fact that it doesn't take me out of the moment, and I never, you know, the inclination to look at the pictures goes away rather quickly when you no longer have the option. And I think that, you know, if you're a Leica user and you're looking for the closest thing to shooting film, this is it. The M10-D was also a great camera, still is a great camera. I feel like I'd be conflicted to choose between the two. The added benefits of having a 60 megapixel sensor like this, which you can, by the way, change in application, which is another thing I guess I should address too, is the dependency on the application feels a bit intrusive, I guess, if I may say. Like, you shouldn't have to rely on an application to change some integral settings of this camera. I feel like if it is trying to be as bare bones as it is, it should have just been, you know, set and forget it, and everything you do in the camera should be available to you by looking through the viewfinder to some extent. So I think that, you know, it's still a digital camera at the end of the day, and its dependency on being a digital camera you're reminded of it all the time. It isn't as analog as you think, you know, it's letting on. And I think that is the hardest, you know, part of this camera for me, is trying to realize you're still shooting a digital camera. You're not really, you know, you're playing pretend at the end of the day. Like, just like the M10-D was kind of gimmicky with the advanced lever and everything like that. I felt like they should have retained those things on this, because Leica already set out and did it. taking it away kind of makes me wonder, you know, are they acknowledging that it was gimmicky? Because, you know, why did they get rid of it? Anyway, I'm ranting, but I feel like going full sleek was a nice touch, but they should have stuck with that kind of design with the M10Ds. I was looking forward to seeing the M11D having that thumb rest, because that thumb rest for me, as quirky and gimmicky as it was, did introduce a nice added benefit of having a thumb support grip built in without having it take up your hot shoe. But now you have this very slick, you know, beautiful looking camera, but it is making the difference between it and the M10 a little bit further, and I don't know. I still can't put my finger on exactly how I feel about this camera. I feel like if I were going to buy an M11 right now and I had to pay a premium to have no screen, I'd probably just go for the M11 anyway, because without having a screen, you have to use the app to change all your settings, which, like I said, feels a bit much, because who knows what the support is going to be like in 10, 20, whatever years, because these cameras are expensive tools that, you know, at least for me, you know, I shot my M10 for 7 years and I just bought an M10R and I plan to shoot that for another, well, hopefully the rest of my life, as long as the batteries are supported. Which I'll also bring up another thing. These batteries are fantastic. They last forever. I like that I could charge it with the USB-C. But there is another thing, third-party support for the batteries. Because right now with the M10s, we're dealing with a battery shortage, so to speak. And who knows how much longer Leica is going to make the batteries. And once they go, at least those batteries are a little easier to reproduce by a third-party manufacturer. This, you know, integrated bottom plateless design here that sits flush, the fact that it is part of the body makes it just harder for another person to manufacture, and which will make it even more difficult in the future for us to source, you know, spare batteries if Leica does stop making these batteries. So I feel like these cameras are so well made that their longevity is promised, but they're reliant on the batteries, and the batteries are undetermined if they actually are going to stay around for that long. We're already seeing that right now with the M8s and the M9s, that there's a scarcity, and at least third-party manufacturers have stepped up to the task and they have started to make them. I hope that Leica acknowledges that as well, because that would be very important for everybody, at least if you plan on keeping these cameras forever, because 60, 70 years now later, my M2 and my M3 are still working just fine, and I would like to see the same for these digital Leicas, because they seem to be up to the task. They're very reliable, and they are well-made machines at the end of the day. So my final thoughts about this camera are, it is definitely a digital camera with an analog soul. It does bring a refreshing experience to the table. Would I spend the money to buy one of these without a screen? I would say yes, if it was less expensive. Charging a premium for not having a screen is a bit weird for me. I understand it's economies of scale. This is not going to be a mass, you know, produced camera. It's not going to be as popular as the M11s because it doesn't have the screen. But still, giving an incentive for people to buying it without the screen would have been nice. You're getting less, but you're paying more. Yeah, great camera, very unique experience. It's nice to be in the moment and present like you would be with a film camera in a digital camera experience. I don't film for those reasons alone though. I shoot film also because I like the look. And so at the end of the day, this is still a digital camera. It would not replace a film camera for me personally, because I have access to so many labs here in Montreal. But if I live somewhere else, remotely, let's say, and processing film was a hassle, yeah, for sure. I can see this as a viable option for somebody that would want to have that analog experience. This is the next best thing, as are all the other screenless Leicas. So yeah, I think that's pretty much my takeaway is this could be your solution for an analog experience in a world without film, but having access to film, this just feels like a very expensive alternative, and it's not necessarily a replacement for film for me. It is nice that you can emulate the experience to a certain extent, but it is not the same thing for me, and you don't have, you're still shooting a digital camera, you know, and that still affects my approach and my mindset when I use these cameras. I know that I'm getting a digital file. I know that the files are going to be great and they're going to be full of, you know, good shadow retention and highlight recovery and all that. These files are rich and dynamic and very, very safe, you know. The M11 files are great, but at the same time, I feel like it's not going to replace film. So that's it. So I'd like to know what you guys think about this camera in the comments below. And thank you again, Camtech, for supplying this camera. It has been a really nice experience and one that will definitely stay with me. I would really love to try an M10-D now, and I still kind of wish I bought that MD262. All right, anyway, see you guys in the next video, and thank you again for watching.